in this workshop, and I'm going to talk about something similar to what Alexander was talking about, which is proving new Born-Schuh inequalities to prove new results in learning and in the context of quantum learning. And this is based on a work jointly done with Srinivas and Charan, who is going to be here in the third workshop, and also Alcopal Dut and Carlos Palazuelos. So first of all, let me tell you what is the Born-Schuh inequality. I'm going to be fast here because we have already talked about this. So in a polynomial with a real or complex homogeneous of PDD, we are going to look at the polynomial via its expansion as linear combination of monomials, and here we have the coefficients. We are going to use this notation to talk about them. And yeah, let me say that I consider homogeneous polynomials for simplicity of the presentation, but somehow you can also prove results if the polynomial is not homogeneous. And we are also going to give a lot of importance to the infinity norm of the polynomial, which is just the supreme value that you get when you evaluate the polynomial on bounded scalars. And what Born-Schuh inequality says is that if you compare the 2D over d plus 1 norm of the coefficients with the infinity norm, that can be a bit bounded by a constant times the infinity norm. And with a constant, I mean something that doesn't depend on n. It might depend on d, but is constant in n.
So what is k here?
Oh yeah, thanks. So here I'm talking about trivial and complex at the same time, and k means either real or complex. And we are going to make a separation because somehow the Born-Schuh constant changes a lot if it is real or complex. So thanks, I forgot about that. Now let me tell you why this was interesting and why this is non-trivial. So this was interesting because it solved a problem proposed by Bohr 18 years before this inequality was proven, so somehow this gives it relevance back in the days. It is also non-trivial because of what Alexander said yesterday, that the exponent here is 2d over d plus 1, which is just a bit smaller than 2, but is smaller than 2, and that is important because if it was 2, then trivially by a Parseval kind of argument, this could be upper bounded by just the infinity norm with constant 1. And the important part is that we have an exponent smaller than 2, and we have no dependence on n, still with an exponent smaller than 2. And this exponent might be a bit weird, right? It looks a bit arbitrary. Why do you look at this exponent? So the reason that you look at this exponent is that is the best. So they also showed Born-Schuh that you cannot go to a lower exponent than 2d over d plus 1. So somehow, if you want to prove a similar statement for the L1 norm, you cannot. This would depend on the constant here. So let me also say that when you put d equal to 2 and you consider bilinear forms, you recover Littlewood's inequality, and this was the inspiration for the Born-Schuh inequality. Littlewood's inequality appeared only 1 year earlier, and they generalized it in a meaningful way. And they did it in a way such that the estimates that they obtained were not too good. They were d to the power d. But it took a long time to improve these estimates. And it was not until 2011 that the Phantom co-authors showed that these estimates can be improved in the complex case for the constant to the power d. And this was very important because they found a clear application determining the Bohr radius. So somehow this motivates why we should care about the values of Born-Schuh inequalities, Born-Schuh constants from a pure math point of view, but they are also interesting because of the applications in other fields. So they have been used in theoretical computer science and quantum. So we already know that they have been used in PAC learning. The result by Alexandros and Pategonisvili shows that they are very useful in solving a learning task that has been widely studied and widely applied. So yeah, they improve a paper that is by Lina Masoon and Lisa, and this paper won the Test of Time Award. That is a very important award in computer science. And somehow, in this work, they made a huge improvement in that work that was already very relevant. So Born-Schuh inequality has been very powerful in the context of theoretical computer science. And after this work, there were other works proving new Born-Schuh inequalities in other contexts, in quantum context, and applying those new Born-Schuh inequalities to learn low-degree objects. But these low-degree objects are quantum objects. And yeah, there's works by Juan, Chen, and Preskill, who are famous physicists and computer scientists, and also Wolfgang Sang and Kleina Slote have works in this line. And yeah, Alexander will talk about this. And it has also been used, the monomerous inequality, to say something about the Fourier entropy influence conjecture, which I don't know if you, Yuval, or it was Noam who mentioned it, but it's one of the biggest open problems in Boolean analysis, and it has some kind of ties to the monomerous inequality, and it has also been useful in non-local games. There is a paper by Monterano, who is a mathematician working in Bristol, that shows that many things in quantum can be proven easily by hypercontractive inequalities. This is a nice paper if you want to find nice applications in theoretical computer science and quantum of the inequalities that you use every day. Yeah.
Just one remark. KSVZ, one letter is missing. It should be BKSVZ. No,
Yes,
up.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't the one before?
If SVZ is, if V is me, then there should be also B.
Okay. Then sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
This is the one I found, but yeah, sorry. But yes, so there is one more author in this paper, sorry I missed that. But yes, so like it has some applications also in the context of non-local games. And these non-local games are kind of important. If you don't know about them, maybe. And let me tell you that we know that quantum mechanics can explain things that classical mechanics cannot do, and this is because there is some games played by two players that are far away. That is why these are called non-local games, for which we know that a classical mechanics description of the game could not score very well, but a quantum mechanics description could score better than that, and somehow this shows a separation, and you can measure this in a lab. There is Nobel Prizes after realizing this with the strategies in non-local games, and somehow monomerous inequality has some application in the understanding of these non-local games. And something important is that we not only care about having a monomerous inequality, because for these applications we also care about the values of the monomerous constant. So this means that we should look at contexts where we can have monomerous inequalities, but also we should try to improve the constants because they are relevant for the applications. So let me tell you now what is the state of the art. The state of the art is that for real polynomials, we know that it's exponential. We know that there is exponential and lower and upper bounds, and we also know that in the complex case it's quite different. We have very bad lower bounds. The best lower bound that we have is just a constant, is like 10, and the best upper bound that we have is better than what you can get in the case of real polynomial, and is a constant to the power square root d log t. So this is what is known, and let me tell you that there is a case of real polynomials that are of special interest for analysis, because those are the polynomials that model function defined on the Boolean cube. These are the multilinear polynomials, and for these polynomials we can use hypercontractivity and essentially mimicking the proof, the usual proof of polynomial inequality using hypercontractivity. We can improve the constant from exponential to the power d to the exponent being just square root d log t. And the lower bounds fall and nothing is known. Like essentially here this constant is 2. So here there is a huge gap, and if you are interested on this kind of analysis of Boolean functions, improving this is a very nice challenge mathematically, but it's also interesting because if you improve the upper bound, you would improve a lot the learning results for these kind of functions.
And what do we think the answer is?
I have no clue. But I think that, yes. So the other day I was talking to Joseph Slot, and he told me that Pat Ivanishvili, maybe you know more about this, thinks that the lower bound is polynomial, but I don't know if they think that the upper bound is polynomial. I have tried to play a bit, but just a bit with lower bounds. I couldn't do anything. I guess that you have to do something smarter. But I don't know. Maybe you know?
No, I don't have an opinion. I want to make a remark that for the real case, little c is equal to capital C. Okay, so we know the exact, it's exponential, an explicit term of 1 plus root 2, depending on whether it's homogeneous or not, plus little low terms. So even the constant is known. So for the real case, they really know very well the value of the constant.
Yes. So this is kind of the state of the art. And now I'm going to cheat. What I'm going to do is improving these constants, but by changing the norm. But I'm not really going to cheat because this norm is going to be meaningful for the applications. So the norm that I'm going to change is the infinity norm, and I'm going to, instead of looking at the infinity norm, I'm going to look at the completely bounded norm. So now we are going to take the supremum of the polynomial, not only over bounded scalar inputs, but over bounded matrix inputs. So we are going to change the inputs of the polynomial. We are now going to consider matrices, square matrices, bounded in the operator norm of any dimension. This is going to give us another matrix by taking the products, the sums, and then we take the operator norm of the resulting matrix. So here, by operator norm, I mean the operator norm when you look at the matrix as a linear map from a Hilbert space to another Hilbert space. And here you have to notice that this completely bounded norm is always going to be bigger or equal than the infinity norm, because if you restrict the dimension of the matrices to be 1, then you recover the original. So this is a relaxation of the infinity norm. And
Sorry, what is the norm of the matrices? What norm?
the operator norm when you look at
The parentheses.
On
from the Hilbert space to the Hilbert space, from L to L.
L2.
Yes.
And your matrices are not symmetric, Hermitian.
No. No.
So your matrix are complex, right?
Thanks. So this definition works for both real and complex. We can prove things for both real and complex, but I think that I know why you are asking for complex, but it is going to be in a few seconds. So first of all, let me tell you why we care about this norm. So we care about this norm because of the applications. That was our main motivation, because it's relevant in quantum query complexity. But it's also relevant in operator spaces, which I think that is the reason why you were asking about complex. So if you look at the complex case of this norm, if you instead of considering a homogeneous polynomial, you consider a form, then this norm had been studied, and is the norm when you look, if you're not familiar with operator spaces, maybe this is, you can zoom out for 15 seconds, but if you're familiar, this is just the norm that you would get if you look at L infinity as an operator space that inherits the structure from a metric space when you embed the L infinity space into the diagonal of a matrix. So this norm was kind of studied before in the context of operator spaces, and maybe these are two things that you are not familiar with, but let me tell you that there is something that you are familiar with, most likely, that can be phrased in terms of this norm, and that is logarithmic inequality. So logarithmic inequality can be phrased as the fact that the completely bounded norm of a linear form, this is a linear form, not the polynomial, is upper bounded by a constant times the infinity norm. So for this kind of forms, the two norms are equivalent, and this is logarithmic inequality.
1 second. Who is A here?
A is a bilinear form, it's a matrix.
Linear.
Bilinear form.
But,
So like, yeah, maybe I can.
so do you really mean that the a's have to be increasing?
Oh, you mean polynomials of degree 2 or what?
Bilinear forms, like,
Bilinear forms.
yes, bilinear forms. So every bilinear form you can identify it with the matrix of coefficients. So, and yeah, this is kind of a.
The L infinity of a form, what is it? What does it mean?
So yeah, maybe I don't know if I have this. So maybe here I'm using a bit of notation. I want to say that given a matrix A, it defines, given a matrix A, it defines a linear form of M, and the infinity norm of the matrix A is the infinity norm of BA of the bilinear form, and the complete bounded norm is the complete bounded norm of BA. So here I'm using a bit of notation because usually when you state logarithmic inequality in this way, you talk about matrices and not about linear forms. You just write the coefficients. So that is why I wrote it like A and not BA.
So sorry, so the infinity norm in the matrix form is what? Is just the maximum of the entries?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
No.
Over X and Y.
Over.
So you take the supremum.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the supreme covariant form that we have defined in this.
Here your polynomial, the i's have to be ordered, but now it's not commutative, so makes a difference.
We're fixing the order, which is so maybe a side note, this does not really make sense in the case of, for example, of function you find on the Boolean cube. There is like not a real order. So for the application, I'm going to simplify and say that this is the relevant norm for quantum Courant complexity, but this is not really the relevant norm for quantum Courant complexity. In some cases it is, because some cases the order is kind of fixed, which is a bit technical, but in general you need a version of this norm that is Fourier analysis friendly somehow. So that is, it's a bit technical, but so in this case I'm choosing an arbitrary order, and without arbitrary order I can say things, but in some cases it does not make sense to choose it.
So this is going to be a query?
So give me a few slides. I will tell you a bit.
So it's, for example, one can get 4/3 Littlewood's inequality from Grothendieck's, which is stupid, but
so like if you, something like that. So we will prove a von Neumann inequality for the completely bounded norm, and with that and Grothendieck's inequality, you can get Littlewood's for
and you have the estimate for kg from below, so it's not completely stupid.
Yeah. It's not the best estimate that you can get, but that way you can get an estimate to kg. Yes. So also let me say that this does not happen with higher degree polynomials. With higher degree polynomials, these norms are no longer equivalent. Already for degree 3 polynomials, you cannot say that these are equivalent. So this is a more powerful norm. So we can expect that we can do something better in the context of von Neumann inequality. And indeed we can. And we proved an optimal theorem that says that if you have a homogeneous polynomial of degree d, then the 2d over d plus 1 norm of the coefficients is at most the completely bounded norm. This is optimal. You cannot do better than 1 because you just can consider the polynomial x to the power d, and in that case both sides are 1. So this is kind of optimal. I have been talking only about homogeneous polynomials because then the result looks better, but we also have a result that looks a bit worse for non-homogeneous polynomials. We have a square root d. This is still like, this works for real and complex. This works for both. So this is still like more interesting than what you can say if you only know that your polynomial, your real polynomial is bounded on infinity. So in that case, you can only say that you have a constant to the power d here, but if you know that furthermore is bounded in the completely bounded norm, you can say that that constant is square root d. So there is still something interesting happening here, even though we can make the constant one. So also you may say, okay, you have cheated. You have put a very big norm, maybe you are just using a too powerful norm. But we argue that that is not the case, because if that norm was too powerful, we could be able to push the exponent to a smaller number, and we cannot. So we can also prove that this exponent is optimal in this case. And to do that, we consider an example of a family of polynomials that show that this is the correct exponent. And something very interesting, for those of you that are familiar with classical quantum Courant complexity, is that this extremal family of polynomials that show this extremal behavior of the exponent is also the family of polynomials that separates optimally classical and quantum Courant complexity. It's the polynomial defined by Fourier relation, which is something that I found interesting. That somehow the extreme example that was known to be interesting in function analysis was also known to be interesting in complexity theory. And I don't know if this connection was already noted, but there is a few of these cases.
So when you say that the exponent is optimal, do you mean that the exponent is optimal for constant 1, or if the exponent is optimal for any constant?
Things for any constant. So if you want to go below this exponent, you cannot get an inequality with a number that doesn't depend on it. Thanks for making it clear. So this is, so what is next? Yes, so the proof is simple to read. It's just consists on evaluating the polynomial on explicit matrices and using Leibniz inequality, which is kind of the standard way of upper bounding the norm that is used in many proofs of the von Neumann inequalities. And somehow this is the presentation of the result. And this result kind of opens a few questions. So the question is, when can we put a reasonable norm on the volume scaling inequality on the right-hand side and still have that it holds with constant one? This is a kind of general question, it's a bit vague, but I can give you two examples where studying this can be interesting. So already our case, the completely bounded norm for the non-homogeneous case, we don't know what happens. Maybe you can push it to one. This is something that we can try it super hard, but we would like to prove that. And also another norm that is in between the infinity norm and the completely bounded norm, which is the jointly completely bounded norm, which is defined as the completely bounded norm, but now instead of taking products, you take tensor products. And this is kind of relevant in the context of non-local games that we talked about before. And you could give an argument similar to the one of Montanaro to say something about non-local games using this norm. So I'm not going to go into details here, but it's interesting in the context of these non-local games.
How to compare JCB with CB?
They can not equivalent. We have separations.
It's not possible.
It's not possible already for the degree 3, we already know that they can be separated by a quantity that depends on the number of variables. Yes, so this is what we have. And now, next thing is going to tell you a bit about the application. So the application is in context of quantum query complexity. First of all, let me tell you what is classical query complexity. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about quantum. We are just going to use it as a motivation. So, classical query complexity consists on trying to compute Boolean functions without looking at many entries of the input. So, it's essentially trying to design good decision trees that are not too deep. So, we have already studied decision trees in the talk by Yuval. So, the goal in query complexity is to try to determine what is the minimum depth of a decision tree that computes your function. And that is something that has been very well studied in classical algorithms, but it has also a quantum analog that I'm not going to detail, and you don't need to know much about this quantum analog, because something interesting about this quantum analog is that it has some structure that has nothing to do with quantum. And this structure is that the output of a D-query algorithm, a quantum decision tree of depth D, let's say, is a polynomial defined on the Boolean cube that is bounded on the infinity norm and has degree at most D. So the goal of quantum query algorithms is to design a quantum algorithm that with low D, with low depth, with not too many queries, that approximates well a given function. So it means that with this polynomial you have to approximate well the function on infinity norm. So this is useful in quantum query complexity, because if you want to show that it's very hard to approximate a Boolean function with a quantum algorithm that only does D queries, what you can show instead is something that has nothing to do with quantum, and is just showing that if you want to approximate your Boolean function with a polynomial that is bounded on the infinity norm and of degree at most 2D, then you cannot do it. If you show that, which has nothing to do with quantum, you show also that it's hard to do that task with quantum algorithms. So, as I promised, we are not going to talk about quantum. And we can put this alongside the result of Alexandros and Pate Vanisvili, and they proved with this one instance of what they proved, but they proved that for polynomials bounded on the infinity norm that take values between -1 and 1 and have degree at most D, they can be backlearned with error epsilon, the epsilon appears here, with these many samples. Log n is pretty cool. This epsilon to the power D is not bad. If you think epsilon as a constant, which is nothing weird, it's just exponential on D, which is not too bad. And this is something that looks a bit mysterious, is the 2D over D plus 1 norm, but we can control it. And we can control it by using the classical, the standard Born-Emerson inequality, and we can say that this is at most poly D. So then we would get that this is D to the power D, which doesn't look very good.
Not very important, but why is the degree 2D rather than D?
Oh yeah, because I'm talking about quantum query algorithms that make the queries.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, you can state it with greedy, but it was like to be consistent with the previous result. And yeah,
But the norm doesn't become 4D over 2D plus 1 or something? It remains the.
oh yeah, maybe that's true. Good point. Yes, here I should also double the exponent.
Why you wrote d to the g?
Yeah.
The standard one.
Huh?
With the standard one, now they're going to improve it.
But it's much better bound, no?
No, it's
No, here you also have a D.
Huh?
Here you also have a D.
There is.
But this would be like the bound that you would get for multilinear forms.
Okay.
For multilinear forms, even you would get this.
Okay.
So, because yeah, here you have a D. No. So this is what we have. Somehow, if you use the standard results, that well, these are important results, all of them. But this was not in the literature; it was implicit in the literature. But you can improve on this because somehow we know that this is not tight. This is not a tight result. We know that there is, that this does not really capture what a quantum algorithm does. A quantum algorithm is more structured than this. And the thing is that these quantum algorithms are not only bounded on the infinity norm, but they are completely bounded. Which means that we have this statement. This was proven by Ron Salam, who is also one of the authors of this work, John Briet and Carlos Palazuelos. And maybe with this extra structure we can improve on learning, and indeed we can, because if we put this extra structure on the polynomial inequality, we improve polynomial inequality, and then using this result, we improve on the learning. So we get this. Okay? So a bit of a disclaimer, this is not exactly the norm that appears in this kind of result. Is a more complicated to define, more technical to define norm, as I said before. But in the case of some structured quantum algorithms that are somehow like quantum algorithms that output on block multilinear forms, in that case, it is the norm, and then you can really get this result. But in the general case, it's not that clear. So this is a result that I have stated a bit more general than it is. But still, if you look at the technical details, we still get a speed up of this kind, b to the power d goes up.
But queries in the scalar case and quantum case probably are different queries.
So yeah, we are not looking at queries, we are looking at samples. Like we are just saying that if you have a polynomial that comes from this kind, we are comparing the samples that you need and the samples that you need in one case and the samples that you need in another case. Yeah, like you are not like thinking that you are generating the queries with a quantum computer. You are thinking that this is a polynomial that can be described, that describes a quantum computer, and then you look at the polynomial in a classical way.
So this number of samples is for homogeneous?
So it's flow for block multilinear for forms, for multilinear forms. Yes, which are somehow like block multilinear quantum algorithms. These are kind of important because, for example, K4 relation, the one I mentioned before, that is the problem where you have the biggest separation between classical and quantum complexity, has this structure of being a multilinear form. So it's not a weird thing to ask. We would like to have something more general, but it's not something irrelevant. So yes, that is the application, and now let me tell you about other kind of polynomial inequality that you can prove with also an application and also in quantum. So to do that, we are going to talk about n-qubit channels, which are linear maps that map states defined on n quantum bits, n qubits, to states defined on n quantum bits. So you can think as a state defined on n quantum bit as an element in this space. So this C2 is like a two-dimensional space that represents a qubit, and you have the tensor product of n of them. And these linear maps, if you want them to be physically meaningful, you have to ask them to map states to states, which means that they should map quantum probabilities, non-commutative probabilities to non-commutative probabilities. And these non-commutative probabilities are just matrices of trace 1 and positive semi-definite. Somehow you can see that this generalizes the concept of probability, because if you pick a probability vector and put it in the diagonal of a matrix, then you get a matrix that is positive semi-definite and has trace 1. But if you allow for non-zero entries, then you have a generalization of this, and this is somehow what is relevant in quantum mechanics. So quantum channel is a map that maps quantum probabilities to quantum probabilities. And as a linear map from C2 to the n, from C2 to C2 to the n can be expanded in a way that is very similar to the Fourier expansion. This is called the Pauli expansion, and it's just saying that this kind of maps, P dot Q, where P and Q are tensor product of Pauli matrices, which are these matrices appearing here. These are 2 by 2 matrices that are kind of important in quantum mechanics, maybe also in other contexts, but they are not everywhere if you do quantum. And these kind of maps are a basis of the space of linear operators of this kind. And this expansion is called the Pauli expansion, and these coefficients are called the Pauli coefficients. And now that we have a notion of expansion, we can also have a notion of degree. In fact, this generalizes the Fourier expansion, so how you can embed functions you find on the Boolean cube to channels in a way such that the spectrum is preserved, so the Fourier coefficients are somehow very well related to the Pauli coefficients that you would get through this embedding. So if you use that idea, the natural way of defining degree for these channels is saying that this expansion is truncated when P and Q act on more than d places. So this means that P and Q take the value non-identity on more than d places. So this is somehow a notion that is important in quantum physics also, because this means that somehow your channel is a linear combination of things that only affect a few particles. So you can think of every qubit as one particle, and as you are linear combination of things that act only on a few particles, that are non-trivial only on a few places, you can think of this as being modeled by only local interactions. So somehow this concept was studied already in physics, and we call it locality, being local. And this is what a low-degree quantum channel is, and we can prove Born-Hammond inequality for this kind of maps. So if you consider a map from C2 to the n to C2 to the n, we can, we are most d, then the 2d over d plus 1 norm of the Pauli coefficients is at most a constant to the power d times the s1 to s infinity. So this is a result that generalizes the Born-Hammond inequality by Wolver and Shank. In fact, it follows the same proof. Essentially, it's a pretty similar proof, but in a bit more general case. And it's useful for quantum channels because for quantum channels we know for free that this norm is 1. So you just can use it and say that any quantum channel of degree d has this normalization of the norm of the Pauli coefficients. So we have this, and now we use it to learn. These objects are important because they model how you map quantum things to quantum things, and we are able to learn these meaningful objects when they have degree d with only C2d squared queries or samples from complexity, where I'm not going to define the model, but with C to the power d squared units of computation. And this is better than the 4 to the n that you would need if you didn't have any promise on the structure of this end-to-end qubit channel. So we have an SSP that we know that the channel has low degree. So this is what we said about quantum channels. And now let me tell you something that is just about Boolean functions, and it's kind of simple, but also kind of interesting. So given a Boolean function of degree d, we can prove an optimal kind of Born-Hammond inequality. So we can show that the 2d over d plus 1 norm of the coefficients is as small as this number. This number, you can think of it as 2. And this is not interesting. This is not interesting because it follows from a very well-known fact, which is granularity of the Fourier coefficients of these kind of functions. And granularity means that these functions have Fourier coefficients that are multiples of 1 over d or 2 to the power d. So this quickly implies this. It's not difficult to prove. So this was not too interesting, but because of that. But it's interesting because of other reasons. And the first reason why this is interesting is because it gives, so to prove that this is optimal, we had to give a Boolean function that saturates this inequality. And the Boolean function that we use is the Boolean function that you could use if you want to show an extremal behavior of degree B Boolean function, which is just the address function. So this was kind of also intuitive to do, but this function has also the nice property of being multilinear form. And
Does this also show that the 2D over D plus, does it go below 2D over D plus 1 for Boolean? Can you go below 2D over?
oh, yes, you can go below. The exponent is not optimal. You can even upper bound the one now, because if you have this, you also have Parseval. So if you have a non-zero Fourier coefficient, that is going to be not too big, so you have sparsity and you get that. So yeah, it's like not super easy. So yeah, but somehow what is interesting is that the function that we used to show that this is saturated is a function that is not only a Boolean function of degree D, but it's also a multilinear form. And for multilinear forms, this conjecture, like the best lower bound that we know for the Boolean inequality, is exactly this number. So somehow we gave a new and simple example of extremal behavior in function analysis that comes from computer science. So again, we have extremal examples that are relevant in both places. And this is also interesting because, in fact, that value is the one that is conjectured to be the correct one for multilinear forms. So somehow we are proving a particular case of the conjecture for multilinear forms when you have this as a structure of the multilinear forms being Boolean. So I think that is somehow the only progress towards that conjecture. So this is not interesting because it's maybe too simple, but it's interesting because it has nice implications with respect to previous work. And now, let me tell you that using the same idea of just exploiting granularity, you abuse granularity, you can just say that you can Boolean functions of degree D with exactly no error. You can exactly learn them with 4 to the D log-n samples. And this is not interesting again because it follows from granularity, but it is interesting because it proves recent work and it's almost optimal. So yeah, Alexandros also has a lower bound that is 2 to the D log-n, so they almost match. So this is what I wanted to say about Boolean functions, but now let me end with some open questions that I have. So I can kind of argue that if you can embed Boolean functions in a natural way into matrices, and you can embed matrices in a natural way into S1 to S infinity into operators from 0 to the n to 0 to the n, and when you embed bounded functions into matrices in that way, you end up with a bounded matrix, and when you embed a bounded matrix into this kind of operators from 0 to the n to 0 to the n, you get an S1 to S infinity bounded operator. So somehow I expect that things that hold for bounded functions be similar for bounded matrices and similar for S1 to S infinity bounded operators. This does not always happen, but somehow this is the intuition that people have when they try to do some Fourier analysis with the Pauli expansion. But if your function is Boolean, the standard way of embedding it is by gives you a unitary matrix. So the matrix is not going to be only bounded in operator norm, but if you embed a Boolean function into matrices, that matrix is going to be unitary. And if you embed it into operators from 0 to the n to 0 to the n, you will get a quantum channel. So as I said in the previous slide, for Boolean functions, the Boolean inequality is pretty simple to show that the value of the constant is sensible. But for bounded functions, it's very difficult to say something meaningful. The best upper bound that we have is c to the power square root d. But for applications, we also have a result of learning low-degree unitaries. What we care is about the Bonnet-Hiller constant for unitaries, not for contractions. So maybe one can improve the result by Wolver and Zhang for the special case of unitary matrices. And if you improve that, which might be true, it might not be true, but maybe thinking with this analogy it might be, then you would improve the learning result. So this would not be only a nice mathematical result, but would only also be interesting for the application, and the same is true for quantum channels. So you can improve the Boolean inequality that we stated in terms of there's one-to-S infinity norm. If you can improve that for quantum science, that would be great. And yes, and yeah, let me say that somehow what we use to prove the Boolean inequality for Boolean functions is granularity, and that completely fails in the case of the unitary matrices. So somehow the proof that we use does not really carry over. And yeah, many things are open in the context of Pauli analysis of either matrices or channels, and they are mainly open because there are these small things that like sparsity or granularity that are not in the context of quantum analysis. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot for listening.